Now we're good, man.
Now we're good. All right.
Troy, Dev,
Good to see you.
man. All right, you too, man. Okay. I'm gonna start and just sort of give a awkward intro for everybody that's on
Yeah.
Patreon that's looking at this here. So, everybody, this is Troy Glessner, who has been a lot of things in my life. He's been a confidant, teacher, and the mastering engineer for probably 700 of the records that we've done in the past while. We started working together right when my son was born. I think the first thing that we had done was the Becoming the Archetype record.
Yeah.
And when I had sent it off to Tooth and Nail, they had said, "Oh, we have a guy and he can do the mastering for you." And typically my experience with mastering has always been, it comes back sounding worse. You know what I mean? Or at least different.
It's not what I intended.
No, that's not what I intended. It's like somebody described it as, I just wanted him to tuck in the sheets and he rearranged the furniture. But it was after that experience, I remember just getting that mastering back and being like, "Oh yeah, no, that sounds great. That's exactly how it should be." And so I contacted Troy and I said, "Hey man, I've been kind of working with people to varying degrees of success, and I'm in the midst of starting a whole new process. And it would be great to be able to work with you and see if we can make some headway with my own stuff." And then from there, we did, I think, you're still with me there? Is the connection okay?
It is. It says it's trying to reconnect.
We good?
I don't know.
Can you hear me? Oh, dude, you look good though.
Oh boy, is it going?
Are you right? Yeah, man, we're good. We're good. And I think the thing is, if the connection bibbles out for everybody watching, both Troy and I are quasi misanthropic and live in the middle of nowhere. Except he's south and I'm north, so both of us are kind of at the behest of technology. But I'm gonna keep talking.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of the intro for the folks here. So after that, Becoming the Archetype record, I contacted Troy and asked if he'd be willing to work on the first of the 4 DTP records, which was Key. And that was kind of a departure for me in a lot of ways because it was like a lot more sparse and like clean guitars and things like that. And again, I got the mastering back and it was fantastic. And a lot of the reason why I was so happy with it is because I never wanted to mix. I mean, when I was a kid, I was like, I had no desire to mix. And then I just found myself in a situation where I was having to explain or articulate my vision to people that just didn't give a shit about whether or not that vision came to light. So I just ended up mixing on my own, much to my chagrin. And so when I said in the beginning, Troy helped me as a teacher in that regard, I was like, I came to you, sir, going, "Dude, I got all this music I got to do. I got this vision that's super, super clear in my mind, but I struggle with some of the more technical aspects of it. And specifically, the thing that's always been problematic for me is when things are too loud. Like if I can hear the compression, or if I can hear the EQ, or like I say, if somebody rearranges the furniture with the mastering." So when we started with Key, I was able to say, does this work? Is this low end work? Is this low mid stuff work? Is this too much, too little? And fortunately, I think Key was the beginning of it, and it was like a more straightforward record. But where we really started getting into it was Addicted. And I remember with Addicted, my first thought with that was I was looking for an engineer, like a mixing engineer. I had looked at Randy Staub, and I looked at all these guys, but it just it was just going to be way too expensive. And a lot of these guys are like, you get one revision, and I'm just like, dude, it's going to be a nightmare. I'm going to waste the money for sure. So I went into mixing, and then from there, when we started Addicted, I'm almost finished here. I'm sorry to ramble. we were able to say, I would send the tracks to you and be like, I was like, I think this sounds like shit. And he'd be like, okay, well, maybe you could try to turn up the kick drum, or maybe you could try to like give me a bit more of this on the snare or whatever. And then I remember very specifically the moment where I started thinking, oh yeah, we can make this work, because you were like, okay, so the meters are moving here. I remember you saying that specifically, and it was sort of like a revelation for me in a way, because I'm thinking, oh yeah, maybe maybe the drums should be louder than I thought, or maybe the vocals should be louder than I thought, or maybe the guitars should be whatever. But the studio I was working at the time was my garage, and I had this low mid bump that was in everything. And then you combine that with my sort of lack of experience with mixing, and then every time I'd send something to Troy, he'd be like, dude, it's all low mid. We have to start carving this shit out.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, man, from there we've done basically every record except for a couple of experiences where there was some family things that that you were going through. So we just we worked around, and I found somebody else for that record. But other than that, ladies and gentlemen, Troy Glessner has been involved with all these records, up to and including the Moth. So, hi, Troy.
Hey, Dev. Yeah, I think one of the things I quickly figured out working with you was I would make little changes that none of my other clients would hear. Like I would, and you'd get, you're like, did you change something? And I'm like, you heard half a dB at like, yeah, and I was like, okay, he can hear all that stuff, which kind of changed how I worked with you. I work with you differently than almost every, every other client. I quickly realized that you already had, this idea in your head of what it needed to sound like when it was done. And I just needed to be the one that made that shit come out of the speakers. And yeah, not not rearrange the living room. But solve problems along the way without changing the vision of that. And, as it went on, I don't think we ever duplicated a process. Like every record was a bit different. Like people would think, oh, you're just an old married couple and you do the same thing. And but every record that I look back on, was a different thing. And I would go into it kind of thinking, oh, well, we did this last time. And 4 days into it, well, that ain't going to work this time.
Well, I also remember every time, because, it's like starting relationships with people. It's like the parameters of those things need to be defined over time, right? Like, you don't want to push too much, but at the same time, like you say, I'm so sensitive to sound that a lot of times I go into working relationships apologizing in advance. I'm like, listen, man, I'm a fucking banana, and this is just it's gonna go one of two ways. It's either gonna be we're gonna keep working together, or you're just gonna tolerate me for this one record, and then we'll never work together again. So anytime we did a record past Addicted, each time I remember going into it, like I guess when one after was Deconstruction. And I had, I'd been working with Jens Bogren for that one, and we were in Sweden, and he wanted to do a mastering treatment to it there, but we'd had our workflow together, and I suggested, going back to you and working through this, and I remember just predicating that with like, Troy, it's Dev again, and if we thought the last one was a nightmare, here we go.
That was a in your face thing, as I recall.
Well, dude, I think it all these the Ghost, Casualties, Epicloud, like over and over again. But when it really dug in, I think is when we did Empath. That was the one that was like where the fastidious nature of both of us just came to the forefront, and we ended up micro-analyzing every millisecond of it. Which set a precedent for Moth.
Well, I think also with Empath, that was when we actually, I don't know, I could probably say that's when we trusted each other's opinions on what we were doing more. that make sense? Like if this guy's hearing this in my master, it's there. You know, I just need to figure it out.
Yeah, and I remember with that one in particular, that was the first time we started swapping stems back and forth because,
Yeah.
you know, the density of the material was such that it's so hard to be like, you know, you could be like, hey, there's a 3.5 spike somewhere in this section, and
Yeah.
you're like, okay, where is it? And it's like it's a buildup of the microphone and my voice and a bunch of synths and horns and a choir and like a chicken or whatever, right?
Yeah, you would
So
send me stems for that, and I would take pictures of EQs that I like try this, and I'd send you a picture back. All this is over text message, and try a cut here, and in your choir stem or in your keyboard stem or whatever, and that's how it went. But you know, like we trusted the process at that point. I can't imagine doing that process 10 years earlier with you without building up to that.
well, not only the building into it, but also just my skill set wasn't at the point where I'd be able to really get it to the point where it was worth doing it that way. You know, I think that again, a lot of the reason why I ended up and continued ending up mixing my stuff is my experiences with mixing engineers, specifically ones that were like significantly better than me, were also maybe stuck in the ways of what things should sound like. And I cite the example often of the first time when I was trying to make a demo. I was like 17 or 18 years old, and I met with some local guy that was, you know, kind of a famous guy around town. And he's like, well, what's the vision for your music? And I'm like, well, it's kind of like Metallica and Def Leppard and Stravinsky and some new age music or whatever. And he says, well, you're going to have to choose one of those.
Yeah,
Ah, man. It's like,
this doesn't go together, bro.
yeah, I'm like, yeah, but it's, you know, it's like, I figure with enough force of will, we can hamburger it together, right? So
Yeah.
I ended up having to learn this shit. And I remember being so intrigued by it at first, you know, like, okay, so how does compression work? And then side chaining, and then how does it work with the master bus and then gain structure? And by the time we got to Empath, I at least had enough sort of working knowledge of those processes that when there was a problem that came up between us, I could understand where to look a little better.
I think.
So, a question for you.
Yeah.
So I remember, so your studio, we both now are in different studios than we were when we started. I was in a garage back then, and your studio was beautiful, but it was different than the one that you're in now. What's the name of your studio now, and what's the basic overview of your mastering chain, your holy trinity?
So the gear is pretty much the same as the other studio. There's not much I changed outboard wise. I'm still old school. I still load in analog for the most part, unless I get something that is like really fast, kind of thrash metal kind of thing. Tubes and transformers just don't react fast enough. Kind of slows it all down and blurs the image when you got, you know, really fast blast beats and stuff like that. So that doesn't go through the desk. But in the desk is the Manley Pultec EQ and SSL compressor, another Manley compressor, a couple other things. But they're basically like glorified tone knobs. You know, it's like a macro, not a micro. Once I get loaded in on the other side, that's when the micro stuff happens. That will be done digitally and stuff like that. But that's like where the basic tone of it goes, you know, goes through the desk and stuff like that. So I still haven't found a way to, it'd be a lot faster if I just had like a big red button I could press and process, you know.
What's the desk? What's the desk that you mentioned? What's the desk?
It's a Argosy mastering desk that has gear on each side and meters and, you know, bouncing lights and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, and then both studios. Well, the other one was set up for 5.1. We did a couple things that way. And this one is also 5.1, but also 7.4.1 for the Atmos thing. That was the big upgrade I did when I moved into this room. But yeah, the room now is, you can kind of see it's, I was watching that TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and they would always meet in this library that had all these kind of bookshelves shaped in an octagon around them. And I saw that and I was like, man, that's killer diffusion. And like, that'd be sweet to put a mastering desk in the middle of that. And so when I built this out here, the walls and everything is just books and media. You can see some of it behind me, but and it's also kind of an infinitely tunable room. You know, as far as, you know, I don't like it, I start moving stuff around. So, and it looks really cool. So
It does. Yeah. What's the monitoring system? You've been using Tannoy for many.
I have the Tannoys are the mains that I use. Those are my main speakers, and that is also the surround system is all Tannoy, which I don't know that they actually make a certified Atmos system Tannoy, but I did it anyway because like it's just amplifiers and speakers and like it works, you know.
Or so, man.
Yeah, yeah. And
Also,
then,
it's just for
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
people. Oh, sorry. Go on. No, go ahead.
Those are my main speakers, and then for my near fields, which I've used for years, you're gonna laugh at this one. They are 6x9 Infinity car speakers in carpeted speaker boxes with an 18-inch sub.
Dude, the 18.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about, man.
Yeah.
You know, I was gonna say to the people.
I had a business partner for years that was like, you know, we'd always do the car test. And I always joked about, I'm like, I just need car speakers in the mastering room. And he finally just bought me speaker boxes. And I'm like, I did it. And I mean, they are hooked up to like a $4,000 amplifier. But I never went back. I never went back, you know, as far as the near fields go. I was like, these things will part your hair and they're fun to listen to. And it's worked. So, and then there's some JBLs up there too. Don't get used as much, but yeah. I'm not going to argue with.
I was saying, like, not only have we done those all the records that we've done, but all the live records as well, and like the 5.1, the Ocean Machine stuff, or the Royal Albert Hall stuff, or the Empath 5.1. And you know what's interesting is I started recognizing the more that these records started coming together, and the more the workload started compounding, that although the vision that I have requires me to mix a lot of times, because there'd be certain records that I would start mixing with somebody, and although maybe the snare drum sounded really good, or the kick drum sounded really good, or the gain structure was such that it wasn't pinning the master bus or whatever, it just didn't feel right to me. So I would, you know, in some situations talk to these mixing engineers I was working with and say, listen, in order for this to work for me, we're going to have to do this and this and this and this, and it's like it's not speaking to me. And then, you know, they were amenable to it, but there was a lot of times where it's just, you know, it's like, hey man, this is my sound, and I'm just like, that's cool if you feel that way, but it's not your music, so I'm going to just do it myself. Yeah. So I would then take it, and I might not have as good a snare drum sound, or I might not have as good a kick drum sound, but at the end of it, the impression that I was trying to put across was there. And it wasn't until you know, more in the latter part of the work where I started recognizing that it's just the workload and the way that it, you know, the juxtaposition between that side of my brain, like thinking on a technical level, versus the creative aspect of it, it just started to get conflated. And so when we got to Moth recently, this is the first time that I attempted something new that I'd like to just give a bit of an overview for, and then we can get your impression as to how it came together for you. I'd been touring for the past couple of years with a guy named Chris Edrich, who's front of house guy from France, and I've been fortunate to work with some great front of house guys in the past. But Chris was the first guy who had the ear for the intricacies, so he was able to kind of take that vision. And although I have people in the past that could make it sound massive. It's just like all the little synths and bleeps and bloops and everything. Chris was the first guy that was like, okay, I'm going to spend time to make that work in a live form. And I was just thinking, once we were able to do that, I was like, oh, he's listening to me. Like he's actually, he's given me the time for me to say, hey, this sounds great, but it would be great if that echo was a little more and this was a little more. And he listened to me. And so when we went to do the Moth, we had to pull it off live before we did the album. It was like we had to do a live stream before. And it hadn't been completed conceptually, lyrically, or whatever. But I had to work really intensively with Chris. And through that experience, we were able to define a working relationship between us where we were focused on different things. So for me, I didn't realize until working with somebody like that, that what's going to make or break a mix for me is relative levels. And I couldn't give a fuck about the compression and the EQ and the master bus and all that stuff. I cared about it only necessity up to that point. So when Chris and I were able to identify a working relationship between us that was like respectful and healthy, I said, well, maybe you could help me mix the Moth. And by doing so, what we did was he would sit in the chair and I would sit in the captain's seat, and I'd be like, okay, I'm going to rough it in here. I'm going to get all the things with my EQs and my bus chain and, all this stuff. I'm going to get it to the point where it sort of speaks. And then we would sort of do like a relay race, and we'd kind of do a high five. And then I'd go upstairs and make some dinner. And then he would just take the captain's chair and he'd be like, okay, so this kick drum is like interfering with the bass drum. And this here is going in, and we're peaking this bus here. And it seems like this could, and you know what I mean? And then I'd come back down, and he had kind of gone through, and I'm like, oh yeah, the compression sounds so much better. And then I'd be like, okay, let me get in there. And then he'd go eat, and then I would take what he'd done, and then I'd just do relative levels. I'd be like, okay, more snare, more vocals, more of that bleepy bloop sound, more of the horn section or whatever. And then we just go back and forth with that. And we had literally, I think, so the Moth was actually one full session. We took, so however many tracks it was technically, it's like 24 tracks. We took all that, put each one of those tracks with bespoke drum files, bass files. It wasn't like a single drum, like kick drum throughout all these 24. It was like 24 sessions in one timeline that was, it was like a terabyte worth of information. In the future, that's going to seem so quaint, a terabyte seeming big. Yeah. But then we were working through it, and then we would take these thousands of tracks, and I set it up on a stream deck. So Ben would, Ben, who's kind of like, Captain Amazing around here, was able to say, okay, I'll make a stream deck for you. So if you want to scroll to the kick drums, for example, you can hit kick drum, and it would go to that, but you'd have to engage which song you're going to. You'd have to go to that. And then as opposed to being like, where is that 3.5 spike coming up? You could be like, there's a good chance it's in the mid-range. And that mid-range here is sort of separated into these buses and whatever. And so by the time we delivered it to you, I think you were immediately just like, oh, dude, yeah, your gain structure's all right now. Or whatever, well, like the low end's a little bit, right?
I when I first, you didn't tell me that Ben was working with you. You're just like, here we go. Here's the Moth. Chris. I mean, Chris. Yeah. And so I got it, and I'm like, did he find a guy that actually gets him mixing? Did he find the guy? And you did. But it was actually a proper tag team relationship. Like total WWE, tag him in, tag him out, And you're different skill sets, but everybody's working together for the same goal. And so that, like, the Moth was a different process for mastering as well. So like I almost feel like I cheated on that one because it was so much.
You didn't have to make my mistakes, man.
Yeah, I mean, like we still separated out the subs and mastered those separately and all that kind of stuff, which we had.
Can you explain that?
So I think the first time we did that was Lightworker, which was totally different process. That one was all digital because I wasn't in my studio. We can go into that if you want to. But that was the first time I think we did that. Was Lightworker, because we're both kind of struggling. I was like, maybe just send me the kick drum, the bass, and the sub on its own stem. So we're mastering guitars, vocals, all that auxiliary huge stuff differently. And then when those big hits hit, they're not messing around with the mid-range and the high-end compressors. That's all settings all on its own. And that worked really well on Lightworker. And then, so we didn't do it on Power Nerd, I don't think, but it did come back on.
Dude, Power Nerd was just, for me, that was one of the worst times of my life, trying to, not only just on a personal level, but just, you know, when, as I know, you know more than almost anybody, when you're going through things on an emotional level, it's things that at one point seem to be clear or just become this abstraction. So, you know, Power Nerd was a whole different thing, man. But we got through that one for sure. But I think that it was almost like a skip between Empath Lightwork and then to Moth.
And I think also,
just go.
I was thinking also something that just occurred to me is like, we're the same age,
Right?
1972.
I mean, what, you're 34 as well?
Yeah, I mean, we're the same. Well, my point is like that we're kind of having kids, having them grow up. Like we were outside of the studio, going through the same stages of life.
You know what I mean?
Renovating too. We were both renovating a fucking house at the same time.
Yep, building, and so there was many things that, like, outside of the working relationship, you know, the personal relationships in our life, we were dealing with some of that same stuff with kids growing up, kids leaving home, you know, relationships and all those things that go on, health issues, and so it's like there's been this odd parallel that I think also helped the working relationship, like, because it's like we were pseudo in the same space. Like I might have been through it earlier a little bit on some situations, you on some others, but like we appreciated that about that part of life creeping into art, I think. And so
Yeah, dude, it's interesting that you say that, because I think that the parallel between, you know, the progress that you make in terms of communication as individuals, it informs every aspect of a creative process. And I think the thing that oftentimes I would get sort of confused by or stuck with in some prior relationships is just kind of the ego that goes into it. Like, dude, if somebody does something, then they should, that's what they do. It's like, why would you want to hire somebody that knows how to do things that you don't, only to try and pretend that you do? I mean, it's like you're trying to learn. And when you said WWE earlier, I started thinking, well, that's actually a great analogy, because if you look at it as a team, or even because I think, you know, my nerd card runs pretty high. I would even say a Dungeons and Dragons chart where you've got the attributes of each character. You know, you got like a wizard who's you know able to cast spells, but he's got like a soft skull. So you need to have like a warrior who maybe can't cast spells but can protect So the idea is to get a straight line, so that at the end of it, what you've got is better as a combination of all these energies than any one person can do on their own. And that's so much more important at this point, specifically when we're dealing with a behemoth like the Moth or something like that.
And the other thing I think is the main way I work differently with you than I work with almost every other client is like most clients pay me to put my stamp on it. right? That's what they like. They pay me to do that, and that I'm expected to do that. But with you, that's not how it works. That's not how it should work to get what's in your head out. Like, I look at my job with you as if Devin had the mastering engineer skills, excuse me, that I do, what would he be doing right now? Not me put my stamp on it. And if Devin was a mastering engineer, like, how would he do this? You don't have those skills, but if you did, I need to like somehow channel that. And that's what needs to come out of the speakers. This is not the time for me to put my stamp on it. And it feels like that's the relationship that got developed with Chris, where.
Well, absolutely. And this is why, and also Chris and I went through a bunch of stuff. Like, we were on the road together for a couple of years and also went through a bunch of personal stuff, you know, in our individual lives there, that we recognized as a result of going through it, that we can kind of rely on each other in the moments that are heavy, right? Because I think there's a lot of times when the big emotions, people tend to sort of retreat from those things, right? But when you're able to go through the fire with people, then I think the musical and the creative aspect of it, it's just like, oh, okay, I know where the parameters of this relationship are. I know what I can rely on. And I also know that it would be foolish to not utilize the skill set of these people. But man, to not have that level of communication between you, man, there's no way that somebody like yourself or Chris or any of these people in my world would be willing to say, oh, okay, Dev, tell me what you need. Tell me what it is about this that is missing, or it's not. I remember doing Empath, drawing you pictures and being like, I think that's what the frequency range sounds like right now, and I'd like it to look like this.
And we developed that.
And you go, I get that.
We developed that kind of language where, I mean, at some point, I think it was Empath, and you said it just sounds brassy or gold, and I'm like, I know what you mean, and you know, like we start talking in colors, you know, and I'm like, I know where the brassy sound is coming from. I got it, and sweet, you know, it's like, so you develop your own kind of language as far as like I am colorblind with my eyes, but my ears hear very well and see colors. So yeah. God took away from my eyeballs, but he gave to the ear holes.
The ear holes.
Yep.
Well, question for you there as well, because to sort of explain it to people who are listening and watching as well, we have this process which we've developed over the course of 20 years, honestly, right? Mm-hmm. But like you say, people pay you to put your stamp on things. Can you give us some examples of some of the other clients that you work with?
Some of the other larger names in the past, I did a Disturbed record, a bunch of August Burns Red, a lot of metal, a lot of like that Tooth and Nail, a lot of Tooth and Nail solids, and I was like at the a lot of that emo screamo stuff, Under Oath, you know, that kind of thing. That's kind of where my stamp. Yeah, that's kind of where my stamp came from, but I'm an okay name dropper, but not a great one.
No, dude, I think that's awesome. I actually really appreciate it, right? Sort of put you on the spot, but I think it was because I went down after we did the Becoming the Archetype thing, and I went down to the Tooth and Nail offices, and a buddy there, the Demon Hunter guy, he was also the dude that was putting me in touch with you, and
that would have been Jonathan.
It's Jonathan.
Right.
Yeah, and also they had that art department down there that did such interesting work.
Yeah, that Ryan Clark, the singer from Demon Hunter.
Ryan, that's who it was.
Yeah,
that's who it was. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, man, because I think also on a conceptual level, like a lot of the reasons why working relationships are important to me to foster is because what I feel that I am involved with on a conceptual level, it's really important for people to be able to like at least empathize with. I remember when we were doing Key, I was so concerned that conceptually it was going in a direction that wasn't in line with what I was hoping to achieve. And I think I had expressed this in a podcast earlier, that my connection to sound is such that whatever goes in is going to come out. So I got to be careful, not only with the people I involve myself with, but the media I involve myself with. It's like, you know, empathetic in a sense, where it's like, if I'm stressed out, I'm going to make stressed out music. If I'm in a chaotic frame of mind, I'm going to make chaotic music. So we've been doing a lot of chaotic music. But also with that, I don't recognize what the concept of the record is until usually the last week of a record. I remember...
But you have ideas along the way. Like, you have ideas along the way. Like, I'll ask you, you're one of the only artists I ask, send me the art. You know, like, I need to see the colors that are, you know, like, even though I don't see colors right, like, that is going to point me in a direction of where your brain is headed, at least.
Well, I know, I appreciate that, and I guess to explain that further, a lot of the ways that it reveals itself to me is in fits and starts. So in the beginning of a process, I'll be like, I think it has something to do with trees or mountains. I think the color palette is gray. I think it's, you know, the power note, for example. And by the time that was done, I was like, oh my God, this is like about separation. This is about, you know, profound sadness and, you know, and surrender and all these sorts of things. But at the time, when we were first working through it, all I knew is it was gray. All I knew it had something to do with a mountain. And it wasn't until at the end I was like, well, the mountain was, you know, an indicator of the scale. But so as the things go, like with Empath, I knew it was going to be called Empath. I knew it had something to do with like a binary sort of existence, a juxtaposition between dark and light. I knew it had some sort of fantasy aspect of it, but I had no idea until the last week that it's like, oh, this is an overview of where we've been to take stock of it in order to move past it. And Moth is the most poignant example of that, because the concept for Moth happened to, you know, hit upon me about a decade ago. And all I knew was it was like, it's something to do with like a Dick symphony. And I remember telling everybody like it's like something to do with like sex, and it's something to do with, and the scale of it, it's got to have the biggest orchestra and the biggest choir, and it's super dark and it's super crass and it's super profane. And at the time I was really concerned about it, because I'm thinking, what are you doing with this? Like, what is this? Like, are you just, like in 2006 when we were working on a record before you and I started working together, when I was doing a record called Alien with Strapping Young Lad, I was part of the concept for that was me experimenting with a lack of accountability. And then by the time that record was finished in the last week, I was like, oh shit, what have I done? You know what I mean? So with Moth, I remember thinking at the time, being like, oh my God, like, just like, don't let this be like fundamentally rooted in toxicity based on the fact that I just have no impulse control or something. And it wasn't until the end of Moth where I recognized it's like, oh, the sex part of it, like the crass part of it, this is about trauma. It's about how do you work through trauma? How do you sit with that in a way that you're able to be present with these really uncomfortable moments in order to find a way through it. You know, the fastest way out is through. And at the end of these things, I'm often just like, the last week, I'm like, what is it going to be? Come on, don't hit me with something awful. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that the Moth too, like the first time you brought it up to me, I want to say it was close to 8 years ago at this point. I mean, time has gone on, but we were working on other records at the time, and it got brought up every time we worked on a record. You know, still working on this thing, still working on this thing. So it's not just another record. It was a record that was made along with, at least my understanding, that developed and was made along with all the growth that had happened, you know, not only growth, pain, heartache, and all the other shit that goes along with life. That like, there was this parallel thing going on that stuff got thrown into, you know, like, oh, this is good. This is going to the Moth, or like, whoa, this stays here. But as I understand it, that was the process of that. And, you know, it 10 years, right? It was about.
Well, yeah, and you know, it's funny you say that, because I think the growth that comes along with it is also like trust in yourself. I think you know, in the past, a lot of the creative impulses for me were rooted in well, and it got me to where I am. So it's not like I regret it or I'd want to change it, but there's a certain degree of emotional immaturity that teaches you a lesson, you know. And I think that with the Moth, a big part of it for me was knowing how strange it seemed, knowing how potentially profane it seemed, kind of relinquishing whatever control I felt I needed to assert over the process, to just be like, Dev, just trust yourself and let it go. And the whole time I'm going, dude, this is going to be awful. This is going to be super, you know what I mean? Like, but I think the growth was just like, you're not a bad person. You've gone through a lot of things. If this is what's in your path, just actualize it with full intent. And I think that, again, by the time we got to the end of it, the thing about the Moth, even the transformative qualities that were mirrored in personal lives or what have you, the biggest lesson that came from it for me was, well, you were right to relinquish that control over the process. You know, that was the lesson for that one. It's like the point of it at the end of it was not, well, and also to recognize that you have a certain amount of agency throughout the process. So if it's going in a way that doesn't ring true, it's within your power to change that, right?
Yeah.
Dude, why can't we just make rock and roll?
Yeah. Well, and I think, well, we were texting about this while we were working on the Moth, and the quote that came up, and I think I texted it you back, it was something Nicole Kidman said to Tom Cruise in Days of Thunder. My favorite quote, movie sucks, but favorite quote is, "Control is an illusion, you infantile egomaniac." Because you were talking about this, you know, like, I gotta just stop, you know what I mean? I gotta let go of this stuff. And like, that was the quote that stuck with me from that movie. And I still think about that today, you know, whenever I, you know, like, control is generally an illusion that we put on our brain to help us sleep at night, but it really doesn't exist a whole lot. We can kind of control maybe about half of what we do in the day. We can't control any of what other people do. And, you know, there's a lot that is flowing and random out there. And it's kind of an illusion, you know, that people lie to themselves about.
I would say half is optimistic, man.
Yeah. On a good day, half.
On a good day.
Yeah.
Well, at least our you know, it's like learning about the reactions too. It's like, I remember the whole intent of this, like moving past where I was on a creative level when I was a kid, you know, when all the concepts were a little more blunt. It's like, this is a song about love. This is a song about sadness. Now I'm angry. You know what I mean? Like those sorts of things.
Here's one about drugs.
Yeah, one's about drugs. Like once you've gotten those things out of your system, it's like, well, we're going to write about that again?
Yeah.
You know? And I started recognizing that anytime I ended up trying to sort of remine those veins, the end result is I feel like, man, I'm just being paid to traumatize myself. And this is not a fantastic vocation. So from there, it's like, well, if you're going to put the effort into making work of this scale, you have to say something that means enough to you that you can stand behind it.
Yeah.
And so letting that process evolve while knowing that you have no control over it really means you got to have faith in yourself, in the process, and everything else. And I think with Moth, that was the most difficult one for me to relinquish, that because it was the first time where it wasn't based on platitudes. where you're making something with the intent of being like, well, I want this to be of some value to people or some help. Even if you're going to do things, you don't want things to be worse as a result of your work. So,
Yeah.
But with that, for many years, I was just like, think positive. Everything's good, you know?
Yeah.
But after a certain amount of time, you're just like, dude, things aren't good.
Yeah.
Things fucking suck right now. This
Yeah.
is really difficult, and this is hard, and everything that's coming out of me at this point is dark. And then when I start recognizing, it's like, okay, so maybe the truth of being able to work through these traumas is not to run from these things in us that we're afraid of, but more so to have compassion for it on some level.
I think accepting that, is obviously stage one of getting to that higher level of, consciousness, if you want to say it in that way, and approaching whatever your art is in that way. It's freedom.
Hey, Devin here. So, to experience the full, unedited release of this episode and gain access to the deeper world of our creative imagination over here at Heavy Devi Records, you can join us at dvn.fm. This is Dev. Thanks again. Podcast.